Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, for those who are new, the goal of the show is to share game-changing stories that our guests are experiencing with themselves, their team, or what they're seeing in the industry. Now, most of us as salespeople, we were trained to deliver value first, followed up with some pricing. And in some instances, holding off on answering those pricing questions until we were later in the sales cycle. And when you think about what the customer wants and the way they buy, that does not sit well with them. And studies tell us that the brain wants to predict outcomes, and it struggles to do this when we withhold information and aren't transparent. And ultimately, who wins there is status quo. So how do we avoid this? How do we go against the grain, lead with our imperfections, be transparent and upfront, sometimes at our own discomfort, but really give them what they want? And to help me answer that question, I am delighted to welcome Todd Caponi to the podcast. Todd is a multi-time sales leader. He's the founder of Sales Melon, and most notably, the author of this amazing book, The Transparency Sale. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. And that intro was fantastic. So you've teed it up really well.
I picked up the book last summer in the height of the pandemic, and it definitely helped me personally. And I do leverage a lot of it and reference it in my sales training teaching. So I'm really excited about our conversation. But just to tee it off, why don't you start off by letting us know a little bit of background on what actually led you to writing the Transparency Sale in the first place?
Yeah, it's crazy. Literally, I think my wife still looks at me sideways about how crazy it is. But there's two things to know. Number one is, and I don't know where this started, but I've always been just really enamored by behavioral and decision science. Like, I just find it fascinating to uncover how the brain engages and prioritizes and decides and buys. And then I've always taken those little learnings and applied them to sales and sales leadership over the last few years. Now, what happened though is that the second piece is, at my last role, I was the chief revenue officer of a company called Power Reviews. And as you can probably guess from the company name, we were in the review space, right? We helped retailers and brands collect and display ratings and reviews on their website. So you're buying a pair of Crocs, you're looking at the shoes, you scroll down, there's the reviews. It was us that was helping with the collect and display of those. Now, to the way that you introed, talking about this idea of like how consumers want to engage and want to predict and want to buy, here's what happened. There was a research study that we did with Northwestern University. And we were just looking at, all right, when a website is acting as a salesperson, what do people do? And there was 3 data points that came out of it, 2 of which changed my life. And I was like, I got to get these ideas out there. It's crazy. The first data point was no surprise. It was that we all read reviews today, right? It was 96% of us will look at reviews when we're buying something we haven't bought before that's of medium to high consideration. Cool. I guess the only surprise there is like, who's the 4% that don't? Like, that would be interesting. But anyway, the 2 that blew my mind. Number 1 is between 82 and 85% of us go to the negative reviews first. So when we're looking at a product, like, we skip the 5 stars and go right to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, which I thought, wait, that's interesting. Like, why do we do that when left to our own devices when a website's acting as a salesperson? But then the last one was the punch in the face. It was this idea that when a product, and this is an average across all product categories, some skew higher, some skew lower, but when a product has an average review score on a 5-star scale of 4.2 to 4.5, so between a 4.2 and a 4.5 average star rating, that's optimal for purchase conversion, meaning a 4.2 will sell better than a product that's got nothing but 5-star reviews. So I started looking at that going, all right, again, website acting as the salesperson, we are driven to the negative first. We actually prefer to have the negative information because it helps us trigger a decision faster. Does that apply to human to human? Does that apply to B2B? And as I started to dig into the behavioral science, everything told me, well, it should. Like, that's just the way we were wired. So I started trying it myself and then with my team, and magic happened. Like, sales cycles sped up, win rates went up. We qualified deals in faster and better that we should win, but that also means we qualified out deals faster that we're going to lose anyway, which is ideal. And then we made it really hard on our competitors. And there was a couple of instances that were so shocking. Like, things happened that I couldn't believe, that I was like, all right, I got to get my ideas out here. There's a chance this book will suck because I've never written a book before, but I just want to share these ideas because I think there's magic here. And sales is not necessarily the most trusted profession in the world. And if we embrace this kind of thing, we embrace transparency, we embrace leading with our imperfections, we can not only sell better, but we can also help the profession. And then the last point I'll make about why it was so urgent is we've all got to keep in mind that selling honestly has been around since the 1900s. I mean, we've always believed. I've got books. This book here is copyright 1916. It's called The Art and Science of Selling. They have a chapter on selling honestly. So we've always known it. But now in today's era, because of the proliferation of reviews and feedback on everything, we have to do it. We can no longer hide our flaws and expect to get away with it. So that was kind of the magic trio of three things that said, I got to quit my job and write a book. And the rest is history.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you did quit your job and write a book because I think, you're helping transform the profession in so many ways. And I love what you said just about rebuilding trust because, as soon as you say what you do, that you're in sales, instantly there's still that car salesperson, that slimy person, and I think that's exactly what it is. It's because we overpromise and we create this sense of perfection, like the five reviews, and your customer knows you're withholding. And I think this might have worked in pre-internet stage, but now they're like, I can actually go in and look at testimonials and see that what you're sharing is not actually true. So that kind of supports that gap in why, sales profession is not seen as a profession. So I love that idea of being transparent and how you drew the parallel, and that, if it's the website is recording that it's leading with a negative and it's, yielding a better conversion, then in that B2B world, you've proved that it actually does happen as well. And I think the B2B shows it's that H to H, it's that human, because as soon as you see the five, I look at the last name. I'm like, that's got to be the guy's kid or wife or somebody, because you just know that, it's inflated. So I think that's amazing. I really do. And I think it's needed. It's needed, and it's more so now. So I'm just wondering, Todd, with what you shared, do you see an increase or a prevalence in this as a result of being in the pandemic and just people wanting that honest upfront, like, don't hold anything back from anymore? Like, has it been accelerated as a result of the pandemic?
A little. I think that, I don't know if it's the pandemic that does it, but I think what we're all seeing is this idea that, consensus selling's hard, right? For any of you that are listening that have to sell to multiple buyers, we're like, oh, consensus selling's so hard. We got to get all these multiple buyers together and get them to rally and make a single decision in my favor. And that's really hard. Like, true. However, we need to keep in mind that consensus buying, much harder. First of all, because buyers don't have a whole team behind them that are supporting them. They don't have a marketing function that's helping them. They don't have processes in place to help buy, because most of the people that are buying your stuff maybe buy one or two things a year. Maybe are buying your solution for the first and last time in their career. So just in pre-pandemic, anytime, consensus buying is harder. But then let's layer in the pandemic. Let's layer in the fact that consensus buying has gotten harder because your buyers are all remote. They don't have the benefit of running into somebody in the kitchen getting coffee and they're, hey, we're thinking about doing this, are you up? Or running into them in a parking lot, or whatever. Every consensus buying activity today has become a formal interaction versus informal that used to happen pre-pandemic. And so I set that up because is this idea of transparency becoming more profound during the pandemic? I think it has to, because if you're forcing buyers to do more homework, our perception of a reward is biased by the journey to get there. Like that's an important point that like, my kids that they love ice cream. If we go to the ice cream shop and there's kids screaming and the line is down the street, even they choose the status quo. They're like, not worth it. Let's go home. Right? That's what our buyers are doing. When we're making the journey harder, when we're hiding the truth and our subconscious knows that perfection isn't a real thing, and now you've just caused me to go do more homework, it's very similar to the screaming kids and the long line at the ice cream shop. We're literally driving buyers to choose not to have the ice cream that day because the journey's too hard. And so I think we just need to keep that in mind in today's world, that we've got to remove friction, and transparency is the most pure form of removing friction from the buying journey.
Yeah, I love that example about the screaming kids, because I think when you think about everything compounded with what people are going through, that we have to make it easy for them to buy, and even the transparency absolutely does that. But even you think about the buyer's journey and like how do they find you? Like how easy to navigate is your website? And this is not even the person yet, that when they actually do engage with you, maybe in that consideration phase, like are you adding value, are you restarting them from that that first phase, or are you meeting them where they're at and really being transparent and asking the right questions and maybe disarming a little bit and saying like, hey, this is what we do well. If you're looking for something like this, this we may not be a good fit. But I think that's critical in just creating, as you said, that frictionless journey for them.
Well, you keep in mind there was a study that was done in 2017, and it was done by a group called the Corporate Executive Board that's now part of Gartner. They looked at, in a buying environment, so a consensus buying group, like where do they spend their time? What they found is that in a typical consensus purchase, that buying group is only spending 39% of their time talking to you, talking to your competitor, or talking to their internal buying group. 61% of their time is doing homework beyond those conversations. And to your point, part of that homework is the initial, you know, is this all being presented to me as perfect? All right, if it is, where do I find out how it's imperfect? Are they going to be a match? But that 61%, in my opinion, is not a foregone requirement or conclusion, right? We're forcing buyers to do 61% more work by hiding the truth, right? By presenting our solutions as perfect. And that's, in what I've seen, is where the sales cycles shrink dramatically. That pre-pandemic or during pandemic, if we're leading with our flaws and telling the customer, just like you said, hey, listen, before we get too deep into this, there's a couple of things. First of all, our competitor just released a solution that not only do we not have, but it's not even on our roadmap. If that's going to be an important criteria, can we talk about that now? Because if it is, maybe we're not the right partner, and I'll save all of us a lot of time. If it's not, then cool. Like, let's talk about how we address that if it becomes one. But like, let's face that up front. Or, hey, you might have seen online that there was an issue that came up a month ago, and there was a bunch of customers complaining about it. Turns out that's totally true. That did happen. And here's what we learned about it. But if that's holding you back, let's address that. It's that kind of conversation up front, that even if they didn't know those things, you've just taught them, you've built trust. Then they go do the homework and find it matches. Trust accelerates, sales cycles speed up. If they did know those things and you lead with it and you own it, gosh, that is an amazing trust building exercise. That, hey, here's who we are. If my role as a sales professional, as a sales leader, as anybody trying to persuade, is to help you make the best decision for you as quickly as possible. Right. And that's it. If that decision is not for me, I would rather know now than in a month and in 6 months, or after I've just invested a ton of time in this.
Yeah. And what I take away from that, Todd, is a few things. Is the first one is you're controlling the message. So imagine they hear that from someone else and it's like, I just spoke to Todd yesterday. And you know what? He didn't mention that. So you're not controlling it. Someone else could be sharing details that may be embellished and you have no way to, to correct them. The other thing I think is that's pre-sales. You haven't entered any contract, any agreement. And in my mind, I would think, holy cow, they're being this upfront and we haven't signed anything. Imagine the level of trust we're going to have when we are in a partnership. And the third thing I think, or the question I would say to you then is, so for sales leaders who, have come through the ranks the traditional way, where they're like, you know what, let's just keep that buried a little bit because they don't need to know. It might not come up. That I think a lot of people still think that way. What message would you give to them from a mindset standpoint to kind of like, again, show them the stats, but like, how would you kind of bring them over to the, away from the dark side to show them that this is the new way of thinking and this is what converts?
Yeah, I mean, going back to my sales history roots, there's a quote from 1919. It's a guy named Arthur Dunn, and he says, "If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it." Right, and like so that's where it starts, right? Like I just find that one like that gives me chills even saying it because I love it so much. But the point being that when we think about the only thing that salespeople have in their own inventory is time, right? And so every minute that we're spending working on opportunities and trying to push that boulder up a hill where there's a couple others that are, we could go ride, that we don't even know about because we're spending so much time pushing this boulder up the hill. I just think that the opportunity cost of working on opportunities where your odds are going to be pretty low is a killer, first of all. But second of all, again, when we lead with this, when we say, hey, you know what, we've had a couple of customers recently who have decided against us because of this issue. And in your environment, we see that this could be an issue as well. Is that going to be an issue? Like, let's address that right now so that when it does come up later, it's completely disarmed. That conversation about they, I gave that example of a competitor releasing a product that not only did we not have, but we hadn't even thought about. That actually happened. And that was the first time I had tried this whole thing. It was with a client. There was 8 people in a room. They were all expecting a sales pitch. And I started by positioning our competitor's new add-on release. A couple of things happened. Trust went through the roof. If that was going to be important, I did want to know then. They were about to issue an RFP. RFP responses suck. And they were going to have us all fly up to New York. That costs a lot of money. I wanted to like kill that right out of the gate. But then the last thing that happened was when they decided to not do the RFP, to not fly everybody up because they just felt more comfortable with us and felt like it was a fit. They told the competitors, and the competitor immediately went into a pitch for their add-on. And that head of e-commerce for that apparel retailer stopped them. It was just like, you know what? We know about that. We've already addressed it. We've looked at it. As a matter of fact, Power Reviews' CRO presented on it, like taught us all about how it works and everything. So we know all about it. It's not something that's interesting to us. So we could start there. There's one other point I just want to make for sales leaders, and I guess it's me being transparent. Um, you mentioned that so many sales leaders are brought up in this kind of old school way of like, let's hide the flaws, hope they don't find out. And then if they do find out at the end, we've built up enough credibility that maybe it won't matter. Well, that's not how trust works, first of all. Like, the trust is a slippery slope. But the thing that I used to do wrong is as a sales leader, I used to look at my reps and say, all right, what's your quota? You at all times need to have 4x your quota and pipeline. And when a rep didn't have that enough pipeline load, because again, it was like you're only going to close 25%. We need to have enough pipeline to make sure that if things fall out, we're still going to hit our targets. That's a flawed way of thinking, because I would start measuring to it, and then reps would start filling their pipelines with crap. I think that we have to get just smarter about qualification in, and then embrace qualification out. If a rep thinks that we've got a really high percentage of loss happening, let's partner together. Let's go talk to the customer about it. Let's be transparent and get out of that deal as quickly as possible. If you do that, you should only need 2x your quota in pipeline instead of 4x. And I think that's an important distinction for sales leader to start to embrace.
I think that's great, and I love the way that you shared. You modeled the transparency and saying this was my flaw as a CRO, and I think that just really shows anyone that's listening, like that's how it's done. And I just felt the authenticity there. It's like I'm not perfect, and I've learned from it, because if what I take from that is if you're asking them to 4x it, that's the formula of garbage in, garbage out, right? But if you say, like, it's also a bit of a scarcity
Exactly.
mindset saying, we got to hang on to this pipeline. It's like, if you also then have to look at the integrity of your pipeline, like, are these within your ideal customer profile? Is the timing right? Because if it's not, I want that out. Like, I want to only deal with active current people that are in that, that zone and ready to do it. But I think people, it's difficult to loosen their grip on that. And it's like, oh, I got to hang on to everything. And from an optic standpoint, whoa, you look great. You have a robust pipeline. But you know what? First of all, Salesforce, those are 4 years old, and it's not updated. So metrics are one thing, but just breaking that mindset of, like, guys, if we're going to lose, wouldn't you want to know upfront, and wouldn't you want to know quick, that we can move on and actually get in front of the people who do want to buy?
Exactly. And it's not only that, it's I remember once I made that shift, and once we really focused on getting good at qualification, I remember going into a board meeting, and our board was just like, Todd, this pipeline's down. Like, what's going on? And it was just like these angry looks. And I was like, isn't that awesome? Like, and here's why. Look at this other metric. Like, there's 4 metrics that go into results. That number of qualified opportunities, how big they are, how many you win, and how fast. Like, those are the 4 metrics. And we can't look at each one in a silo. So the fact that we had a lower number of qualified opportunities, well, the ones we do have are a little bigger each, but even more importantly, we're winning a heck of a lot more of them. And it's because we're getting really smart about the pipeline that we actually qualify and the pipeline that we're working on. And the results spoke from themselves, right? We were growing, we became Chicago's fastest growing tech company. And I truly believe in my heart that a lot of it had to do with this embracing of transparency and getting really, really smart about the way we qualified. But yeah, you're going to have pressure from the board looking at metrics and silos when, to your point, we've got to change our mindset around what's good in those metrics and what the ratios are, because the ratios are more important than the little pile that you're looking at.
Yeah, and you use the word shift there, and I think that's what people need to do. They have to shift. I mean, you tried it and it worked, and I'm curious, if that didn't work, would you have tried it again and said, I'm going to debunk this formula until I get it? But it worked for you, which is great. And just what you said there, Todd, I'm wondering, when you look at the deal metrics there, when you look at deal review, and do people actually do this and go, okay, we won these, but even, why did we win them? Or conversely, we lost these. And I teach a lot of in the sales process. And it's like, you need to pinpoint at what point things started going up or down. Because if you want to repeat it, you need to know where it's happening, but more importantly, why it's happening. What are you doing that's contributing to the success? Or at what point is that buyer going, I'm disengaged, I'm confused on your website, you're withholding? And then you go, this is where the blockage is. Guys, roll up our sleeves. This is what we got to do. And I think some of it might show that transparency. This is in this meeting, we said, hey, guys, we had a recall. You're right, we did. Let's talk about it. Let's air it, because our competitors, they've got it on their website that we had a recall. So if we're not talking about it, red flag, and shame on you.
Yeah, control the message. I'll tell you though, there was something you just said that triggered uh, something that for sales leaders and then hopefully sales people that are in these environments. One of the other shifts that we made when I got to one of my companies, my CEO was old school. If you lost, you got outsold, right? Like, that was the mentality. And if you lost, you moved it to close lost in Salesforce, and it triggered an email to the executive team. And as soon as they would get it, they'd walk out like, what's wrong with you? What do we do wrong? Right. And what that did is a number of things. It caused reps to bury losses, meaning instead of actually moving a deal to close lost, the reps were like moving out the close date. Like, we'll deal this later, or moving it to suspect. It's no longer qualified. But it was also forcing reps to get leaders involved later, because gosh, my leader's putting a lot of pressure on me about this deal. If something's going off the rails, I'm just going to deal with this. Like, let me fix it. I don't want to get my leaders involved because they'll yell at me and make it my fault. But we end up, like we talked about, we end up spending a lot more time on opportunities that we probably should get out of a lot faster if they're going off the rails, right? That old school punish you for the losses, I think has got to go away. And instead, what we started doing is celebrating the losses. And I know that sounds so counterintuitive, but we would celebrate the losses for the effort and for the lessons learned. Because until you do that, the rest of the organization will keep repeating issues and keep running into things that you just ran into that nobody knows about because you hide the loss, right? And so, the reps are already getting punished in their wallet. They're already getting punished for their quota attainment. Let's celebrate. Hey, Karen, great. We saw you lost that opportunity. I know that sucks, but awesome job on this thing. And I really appreciate how you figured this out and qualified out quickly. And like we bowed out right away because we knew this was going off the rails. But if you could spin the world back 6 weeks to the beginning of this thing, tell us about like what you wish you would have seen. What was it about this opportunity that maybe we could have recognized sooner? Celebrate the losses. And when we do that, we lose less often, morale goes up, our forecast gets more accurate, and we can collect those things and it will inform our messaging around transparency in the future. When you start to see trends, you can start to go into companies that are like that and say, hey, before we get too deep into it, we've had this experience with a couple of clients. If this is going to be an issue for you, let's address it up front. We learned that by celebrating the losses. So big mindset shift there. Stop overloading the pipeline to quota ratio. And number two, losses are wins if you do it right.
Yeah, it sounds to me like that's almost a culture thing.
Yes.
When you think about there's shame and blame buried in there. And it's like when you can air that and take the learnings from it. I just think it's like when you're sharing insights with a client, right? And you say these are the top two or three, and they give you a fourth one. That fourth one kicks out your first one. Now you have three, and it's just like that rolling stone gathers moss, right? So it's the same
Yeah.
thing here. The more transparent you are, you're seeing what works, and then you build that back into your playbook. So it's almost persona driven, it's almost industry driven that you start seeing, like in this instance, this is what disarms them at what stage. So there's a bit of predictability there. And I think then you can share that with your whole team, right? So that there's no shame in losing, because for me, it says there was a willingness to try there. And also I think when you lose, there's an element of you have to own it. Like you own the wins, but you also have to own the loss. And
Exactly.
then once you've acknowledged it or owned it, then dig deep and go, what could we have done differently? And it might have been that messaging. It might have been something else. Like they made it, they may have, well, will never buy from you anyway. But I just think exploring that as an exercise, like a post debrief, is very valuable, even for the rep and future, growth and creating a safe environment for them to be okay to lose.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's exactly it. And most environments are not like that. And the environments I grew up in were certainly not like that. You lose a deal and it was on you, and the weight of the world was on your shoulders. And instead, I mean, it's crazy to think about on a weekly team meeting to bring everybody in, and a rep just lost a big opportunity they just spent 4 months on, and we're all clapping for that person. Like that's a crazy mind shift. But then they're like, yeah, like let's make sure this doesn't happen to you, right? And that's an amazing mind shift and an amazing morale booster. You know, we've talked a lot more about leadership here because like that's been my more recent nerdery. But I think it's so important because your reps are all by themselves in their homes, right? Like you could have all your Zoom happy hours you want and think that you're making a connection. But inherently, we as human beings, when we're by ourselves, our survival mechanism goes up a little bit. Like we need to know that somebody's got our back. That's so important. And again, all the Zoom happy hours and relationship building you're trying to do, it will never mimic the world of in person, being in an office, hanging out with people, going to lunch with them every day, having a drink after work, that sort of thing. Embracing the losses is like the clearest evidence there is that people have your back. And what I'm worried about is that if we keep this you got outsold culture and everybody's remote and the emotional and physical cost of changing jobs right now is almost zero, that if you're not making this shift and things start to open up, you're going to start to experience a massive turnover binge. And I promise you that when you look at your team today and you go, oh, Chris and Sally, they love it here. They're sticking around. I bet you one of the two of those is gone in 6 months. You will be shocked if that's still the mentality and the culture you bring to sales. So we've got to create these environments where reps feel like we have their back too. And embracing the losses is a great way to do that.
Yeah, I just think what I take from that is you're promoting
Yeah.
vulnerability and you're celebrating it. And I think the worst thing is to point someone in in a negative light for that. And it just, as you said, when there's such a yearning for connection, for community, think of people who have joined a sales role. Maybe the first sales role had a remote onboarding process. They've never met their boss. They lose a deal because they don't know what the heck they're doing, and then they get shamed in front of their team meeting because they lost it, and they're like, I don't even know what the heck I'm doing. And I just think, what does that do to the culture for Sally and Chris, who are kind of on the fence already? They're like, you know what, there's a revolving door and I'm heading out.
Well, yeah, the trigger for change of jobs is nothing. Like physically, you're not changing your commute either, right? Like I don't have to change anything. All I have to do is give you my laptop and you send me a new one, right? Like the new company sends me a new one. The emotional cost is exactly what you just said. Hey, I you can have all of the Zoom calls you want, but if I've never met you, I've never broke bread with you, I've never had a drink with you, I've never, run into you on the train getting into the office with you, like none of that, your emotional cost of changing jobs is almost zero. It's so easy. And it's not just Chris and Sally that are slightly disengaged. Your most engaged reps today, the trigger is nothing. You raise quotas, you shrink territories, they lost a big deal and they see their pipeline as being a little bit less than they had hoped. They've got a buddy that is making a ton of money at a company that is not only super cool, but is hiring like crazy. The trigger for them to leave is nothing. And you have to create safety and connection and security. I also believe that you have got to create mission and purpose that's specific to what they're doing, because that's a unique element to only your job, the mission and purpose that you have, meaning the impact on the company, the customers, and the customers' customers, and that rep's direct line to that. Those are all things that we need to be prioritizing right now, because otherwise, I see a turnover binge coming.
Hmm. And where would you say empathy fits there, Todd? Being empathetic to your team as to what they're going through. Here up in Toronto, we're back. Ontario's on a lockdown. We're back to remote control, remote schooling, and just not really being aware of what people are individually going through, yet holding those expectations the same. So, where would you say empathy comes in from a leadership standpoint to the team?
Yeah, and it's not only the team, but their customers too, right? In a selling environment. Can we start by let's define empathy for a second. So that's like as I'm scrolling LinkedIn or reading, and I hear people talking. A lot of people talk about like empathy is so important right now, and then like you and I were talking about before this, like the next sentence out of their mouth is, "I sure hope you're doing well in these tough times." That's not empathy. That's sympathy, right? Like we are getting confused about what empathy and sympathy is. Empathy is the pure being able to walk a mile in the person's shoes that you are dealing with, understanding what their pressures are, what their world is like, what is what's happening in their world, so that we can relate to it, and as a result communicate, help them out in a more specific way. Doctors, a doctor goes to college, they go to medical school, they learn, and they're spending 8-10 years as like learning all of the bits and bytes about the medical profession, right? They're practicing, they're doing all of these things, but what's that they learn a ton about, that's almost more important than the knowledge. It's what they call clinical empathy, right? Clinical empathy is like the most important thing a doctor can learn, and clinical empathy is being able to, like, when you're delivering some bad news, you better be able to experience it in a way that that individual is, so that you can place it in the right way, so that they're encouraged, so that you don't sound like a complete jerk and like a know nothing jerk. Like, imagine walking in and just being like, you're gonna die. Like that's crazy, right? But that's what salespeople do. That's what sales leaders do a lot, right? Their leaders, like, they just don't have that clinical level of empathy. So a couple of things. Number one, for your sales reps, go beyond the forecast in your one-on-ones. So first of all, I hope you're having one-on-ones. But if your one-on-ones are only about the deals and the forecast, you have no empathy. You're not at least connecting with these individuals. Ask them questions like, "Hey, why are you still here?" Right? Like, I know that's a crazy question, but there's so many job opportunities out there. Like, what does this job mean to you? And like, why are you into it? And hey, do you know what your work means to me as a leader? Here's what it means. Do you know what your work means to our company? Right? It's not just hitting the number. Like, there's the impact you're making. Do you know what your work means to our customers? Do you know what your work means to our customers? Like, it could be as much as like saving lives, right? So that's empathy, is make sure that you're walking a mile in your rep shoes and understanding their world and making that connection and helping them see the connection if they haven't. And with the customers, it's kind of the same thing, right? Customers are a little different, but I think there's opportunities to build empathy. And I'll give you a quick example. In my last role, we were selling to, or actually two roles ago, we were selling to marketing. So, like marketing, we were selling tools for marketers. How did we develop marketing empathy and empathy for the chief marketing officer and the head of digital and those types of things? Well, first thing we did is we sat down with our chief marketing officer once every couple of weeks, right? Like, hey, Tim, what are you working on? Hey, when you get an email and you've got 100 emails in your inbox, what's standing out to you? Like, what are the things that matter? Hey, what conferences are you going to? So, like, we're familiar with them. And, like, why do you choose one over the other? How are you measured? Like, what are your metrics? I know this is intimate, but like, how do you get paid? Right? Like, you've got these resources in your own company often. That's a great place to start and build empathy. Walk a mile in your CMO shoes if you're selling to marketing. Walk a mile in your CFO shoes if you're selling to finance. Walk a mile in your operations. Like, it goes on and on. You've got these resources around you, and that's an incredible opportunity to really truly embed empathy in your approaches, and then you become a value-added asset to your prospects and your reps instead of a necessary evil.
Oh, so much there. I just want to comment on the one part about, with the individual contributor. And I think everybody wants to know that they belong and that they matter beyond the commission check. And I think I always say it's like a puzzle piece. Like, I'm a piece, and I know that the output is great, but where does this fit into the bigger picture? Because sometimes that contribution seems so small, but when I see, holy cow, that whole quadrant is filled up with what I did, if I don't see that, that doesn't give me that sense of contribution, and just that I'm okay, because I'm not getting the pat on the back or the beer after work anymore. So what does that look like? And I think it's up to leadership to do that and just really connect and say, like almost sell them why you are here. And this is the value you bring. The challenge is, it's got to come from a place of authenticity. If you're a leader and you're just providing lip service,
Yes.
that's just damage. And that's just, that goes on too, which is unfortunate. I think that's very key. And I think it's really needed now. And I love what you just said about, you're sitting on these resources. Like, the people you're targeting are in your office, albeit they're not physical now, but call up the CMO or just say, like, this is the persona. Like, what subject line got your attention? Why? Like you said, those conferences, because a lot of times we haven't done those roles. I always say Google the role of somebody and see what they're doing. But beyond that, you're sitting on them. You can actually have a conversation and get a little bit more of the why behind it, and then leverage that on your clients. And again, you see what works. It's a bit of testing. But it's like, the language of a CFO is going to be very different than the CMO. So if you're painting them all with the same brush, it's definitely not going to work. And I think there's a bit of that laziness too. It's like, I want the quick magic bullet. It's like, that never existed, and now it more importantly doesn't exist. But I think when you have the access to those resources, like, use them.
And to that first point, one of the things is I talk to leaders and they try to convince me that, hey, yeah, we do these like every Friday. We do a Zoom happy hour, and oh, Todd, we just sent the reps a swag bag, right? And it's got like socks and a sweater, and then like this Yeti cooler. It's awesome, and they like, you know, every company's doing that. Like that's there's again that connection that we're trying to make, that empathetic connection, and that connection between a rep's activity getting beyond the forecast, getting beyond their quota, that's the unique adhesive that will keep them there versus the swag bag. All right, I got it, cool, now I can quit, now I've got an extra t-shirt, right? Like that kind of stuff. You're not going to win on perks, you're not going to win on like the Zoom happy hours and the like those like fun games. Like, hey, we played Jeopardy on Friday. And like everybody, all right, cool. You know who else is doing that? Everybody, right? Like we've got like again, you've got to think about like what are the unique things about this organization and your connection and your mission and your purpose. It's unique to every organization. Make sure that your reps understand that.
Otherwise, it's like everything else is a box checking exercise, and they totally
Exactly.
feel that. But that leads me then to transparency. So imagine these sales
Yes.
leaders are saying, instead of taking that approach, they're saying, "Look, Sal, we'll go back to Sally and Chris. Like, you know what? I've actually never been through something like this before. So maybe the Jeopardy doesn't work. I'm trying my best. I do, feel that you're struggling, but maybe as a team we can brainstorm. You can let me know what I can do better because my goal is to really support you, help you develop, be that, shoulder to help, field some of these insecurities. But I can't do it because I've never been through this before. Like, what does that level of transparency do? We'll first talk about your team and then we can relay that to your customer.
Well, yeah, there's I don't know if all the people that have reported to me would agree with this self-assessment I'm about to give myself. So like that's the caveat. But my approach was always to my team, and I would say this to them during one-on-ones and like even in skip level where I'm talking to somebody who's 2 or 3 levels below me, that listen, we're literally all equals here. I just have a different set of responsibilities, right? Like, you've got a territory, you're trying to hit a quota. Guess what? I'm trying to curate all of this and maximize the performance of each one of you as best as I can and see the roadblocks ahead and clear them so that you can be as successful as possible. And again, like my responsibilities are just different than yours. If I'm a leader talking to a rep, like I remember talking to one of them and having this kind of conversation. Like, again, we're equals. We just have different responsibilities. The only difference is you get paid more than me, right? Like, because the sales rep, like my top performing sales reps are making more than me, which is awesome, right? So, like, that's the only difference. But if you come at it from that mindset, the way that you just positioned transparency and vulnerability of, hey, listen, this is my responsibility. Part of my role is to just make sure that you're all engaged and that you're what I call intrinsically inspired, meaning you want to stay, you want to do your best, you want to go tell your friends about how great it is here. Like that's my goal. And when you all do your best, then the performance should come right out of the back of it. And I'm just learning. Like I think back to the first time that I got moved into a sales leadership role. I, I was already running sales ops for the company. I get promoted. I already know all of the reps. We've had drinks together. We've been friends. And all of a sudden now I'm their vice president. I, that was one of those times where I was just like, hey, I'm going to learn on the job here. So like, let's go. Here's the way that I'm going to approach it. And like, I'm going to hold you accountable because that's my job. And your job is to do your thing and let's help each other out. So I think that's where it starts.
I think that's great. And when you think about those transitionary roles, like, from an individual contributor, that first management, it's like we were buddies and now you report to me. And I think there's no better time at that point. Like you said, you have to hold them accountable, but just saying, like, on Friday, I was a rep, on Monday, I'm a manager. Like, for me to claim this big, I know every, like, that's just, you're going to erode trust pretty quickly. But I just think it also says, like, I'm still one of you, but in a different capacity. And then you redefine what those rules and those
Exactly.
or engagements are, but just keep it real and and be transparent with them.
Exactly. That's it. Well said.
So when you think about that to the customer, because I can just tell you, you know, It's uncomfortable. Like, the first time doing it, you're the slogan I say is people connect with your imperfections, not your perfections. But for me to model that, and when I started doing it, it definitely was a struggle going like I don't have all the answers, because you back in the day you're like you think it's the right thing to do to say I have all that, but to disarm and kind of share that, you think that people are going to judge you like, well, how did she get this role and how did she do that? But what they're really thinking is, wow, you're actually more relatable now because you're more like us and you understand that. So I think it's getting out of our heads and figuring, oh my God, you have to know it all. Because what happens, what I've seen is when you say you know it all and you actually don't, they start thinking, what else have you told us you know it all and you actually don't? And then the trust, they're like, this guy's a liar.
Well, yeah, I think the word that I always refer to comes from supermodel Tyra Banks. And if you know Tyra, like she's built an empire around really this foundational word, and it's flawsome. And it's to embrace your flaws, but know that you are still awesome. And if we come at it from that perspective, because obviously, if you suck, then you wouldn't be where you are. If your product sucked, you wouldn't have a company. But they're also not perfect, right? And to embrace your flaws, it goes back to how we started this conversation of the way that you approach things, the way you message things should hit that 4.2 to 4.5 range, right? Of pretty darn good, not perfect. Here's why we're not a 5. If you're cool with that, here's what you're going to love and what makes us a 4.2 to 4.5. To do that with the way that we present our solutions, but also the way that you lead and the way that you come at your job is to embrace that, hey, I'm in this role because I'm pretty darn good at this, but I ain't great, right? Like I got some work to do. Here's where I need some help, and here's where I'm really going to be helpful. It's an incredible disarming mechanism, but it helps us predict, it helps us decide, it helps us stay engaged.
Yeah. And it just shows you have a learning mindset as well, or a growth mindset that, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn. And just what you said, people don't buy fives anyway. So why are we striving for the five? Let's, average
Right.
is average is actually working. So where would this flossom show up in a customer environment? Like, where do you start? Is it in that, qualification stage? Is it in the discovery? Like, where do you start, maybe sharing that, you're not perfect, or that there's something in the news that you lead with? Where do you think that first exposure would be?
Well, I think it needs to start from the beginning. So there's always an alignment, right? Which is like, hey, why are we spending time together? What are we like? You're investing time in me. Why? Like, make sure that you understand that. But then I typically suggest you go right into it. Just say before we invest too much time in this, because again, if 82 to 85% of us are going to the negative reviews first, right? So we went to a web page, we're clearly interested in that thing, we read the paragraph about how the product itself is being presented, but then we scroll right down to the negative reviews. And that's why I believe we've got to lead with it. When we lead with it, that's the disarming mechanism. You had mentioned earlier about the fact that just the fact that you are a salesperson, our brain puts up, it's called the limbic filter, but it basically takes all of the words coming out of your mouth and runs it through basically a BS detector. Your role, your job is you want to disarm that filter, right? You want that filter gone so that what you're saying is on equal footing with any individual that they might have a relationship with. And so that's why we've got to lead with it. So that's number one. Number two is, to your question is like, how do we start? I just, I like to give people some homework, right? And that is things like go act and like a customer. If they start the engagement with you, and we know that 61% of their time is going to be spent doing other stuff, back channeling you, what is it? You better know. Like, do you know what, when you go to Google and write, what is it like to work with, and then write your company in there, what comes up, right? Is it, a lot of times it's Glassdoor reviews, which is interesting. Glassdoor is a place where current and former employees leave reviews about what it's like to work there. If I'm buying something where it's going to require a relationship with that company, I not only want to know if the products or solutions are going to work and work in the long term and work for me, but I also want to know that if I have to deal with you, then you actually like your job. Like, if everybody hates their job in a company, like, that's one of those elements that we've got to understand what are the buyers going to find when they do their 61%? They, go to Google, look at the Glassdoor reviews, look at product reviews. If you're in the tech space, it's the G2s, the trust radiuses, the Capteras. If you're in other spaces, like there's equals to that pretty much everywhere. There's the Yelps, Google reviews, there's industry analysts. Like, do that homework. You got to curate that together. And then the other piece is, again, if you start to embrace losing in your organization, you've got to curate the reasons why you're losing too, and that'll help inform your messaging. But again, I'm not encouraging anybody to go into their next sales engagement and be like, hey, this is why we suck. Like, take it easy. Let's think about that 4.2 to 4.5. We've got to embrace our flawsome. And I think there's simple ways out there that are there for the taking for you to be able to inform and curate your messaging.
That's all great stuff, Todd. And when you think about when they're looking at these Glassdoor reviews and they're evaluating, the type of partnership this is going to be, and if there's a lot of negativity about past salespeople that's worked there, that's a red flag, right? So, how important do you think it is for the salespeople to really understand their why, their purpose, like the impact they want to leave? So it's not just what I do; it's like, and that comes with storytelling, but there's an authenticity and there's a connection there, and we know that we buy on emotion. So how important is it to really understand your why?
Well, yeah, this is a really weird analogy, so but I'm going to do it anyway. I believe that sales reps, I just taught a class on this yesterday, so it's kind of fresh, is this idea that sales reps come to the table like they are either there to appease so that they can get a contract signed, or they're there to sell, right? It's like customer wants something, they Tommy boy it, okie dokie, here you go, here's the guy, like, let's go. Or a customer is a little bit apprehensive and then you just start pounding them. I believe that if reps view their role a little like a reality makeover TV show star, and I know that's crazy, but if you think about shows like on Netflix, Queer Eye, or on Restaurant Impossible on Food Network, or Biggest Loser, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, in each one of those cases, those individuals that are running the show, like the Queer Eye guys, there are these five guys that are brilliant in their different categories. They show up to help somebody, right? So there's an individual that knows that they could be living a better life. These five guys show up and they don't go into a pitch about how great they are. That would be the worst show, the most boring show in the history of the planet. Instead, what are they doing? Hey, Tom, why are we here? What's going on in your life? Like, why did you volunteer to be on the show? Well, I've got this issue and this issue. Oh, well, hey, let's get to know each other a little bit. They disarm, and then they go into, hey, we noticed that you've got this issue too. Is that something you've thought about? Hey, we noticed an opportunity for you over here that we see with others that seems like it would apply here. What about that? And they start educating and they start bringing ideas and they act as a consultant. They help the individuals see that they can achieve more than even what they thought they could. And instead of leading with their solutions, they're leading to their solutions. Like, that's it. And by the way, those reality makeover TV shows are really compelling to the participants, which is what you want. And they tell a great story, which is also what you want. So we've got to think as sales reps about our role as being more like the reality makeover TV show person, or maybe something more relatable is like a personal trainer, where like you wouldn't go to a personal trainer and say, hey, listen, I want to lose 5 pounds. Here's $50. I'm going to go use that treadmill. I'm going to go do some push-ups. The personal trainer wouldn't be like, okie dokie, cool. Personal trainer would be like, all right, tell me about the 5 pounds. Why are you trying to achieve that? And hey, you know what? I think you can achieve more than you even think you can. And I'm going to actually help you see some of these other ways that you can get there that might be easier and might have a bigger reward. Would you like that? Of course. That's your role, right? And so let's think differently about our role. Stop leading with, lead to, be a consultant, help them see outside of their own bubble that they're living in.
And that for me is when you think about the art and science of sales, that's the art. And I know
Yeah.
gong.io has that slide and I use it in all my trainings, that current state and future state. And everyone goes to the pitch, the future state. And it's like if they haven't acknowledged
Yeah.
that they have a problem or status quo is not an option, you're dead in the water. So you need to get that first one. But
Yes.
just like you said, how do you get it? You have to teach them, and you tee up ideas about themselves. But the key thing is here is the aha has to be theirs. So you have to tee it up, but it's got to be them that comes to the, oh, maybe I need to do this by me asking those, illuminating those questions that are going to expose something, get them thinking differently. But what happens in sales is someone says, oh, I think I have this, a bit of a scrape on I have a band-aid. And it's like, hang on a minute. Like they didn't even finish to say they have a scrape.
Exactly.
It's not even bleeding. And it's like, stay on that current state, because I think that's why we have the name we do, is that we immediately pitch. And if we just took time for a moment to understand, even from us, is this worth solving? Is it happening frequent enough? What is this costing you? Because you know what? This great, the band-aid is not even worth it. Like, let it bleed.
Exactly. That's it. I mean, that's exactly it. So it's funny that there there's this behavioral science element, and it's that, and it goes all the way back to 1620 and a guy named Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon in 1620 theorized this idea that logic is polarizing, right? And this idea that once we've established an opinion, we will take all logic and data in to support that opinion, even if that logic and data goes against our opinion, right? And the way that we do that is we'll take the stuff that supports our opinion and go, that's right. And we'll like add that to our argument. If we take something in that goes against our opinion, we'll configure really quickly, this is why that's wrong. And now I've bolstered my current opinion, right? Well, in so many cases, I see sales reps just leading with logic and data. If you're going into an audience that's already established an opinion on something, either for you or against you, you're literally polarizing that audience and making consensus buying harder, because consensus becomes harder when you are polarizing that audience. Things like your NASCAR slide, right? Your logo slide. I used to joke at Power Reviews that if I saw a logo slide in the first 5 slides of a deck, whoever put it in there is fired. Now, that was a joke, but it was kind of one of those things where, like, I don't know if I want to test it, right? Because a NASCAR slide, let's imagine you're presenting a NASCAR slide to 10 people. 5 of those people are for you. Like they're like, yeah, I want to go with them. They'll look at that slide and go, wow, those are some great companies. If they're good enough for them, they're good enough for us. Winner for those 5. But what about the other 5 that are either leaning towards a competitor or leaning towards not doing anything? They might look at that same slide that you are so proud of, that logical slide, your credibility slide, and look at it and say, wow, those are some big companies. We're going to be a small fish in a big pond. Huh? I don't know if I want to go with these. I'm going to use that in my argument for why we shouldn't go with them. Or there's a couple of other people that are like, wow, that logo slide's got all kinds of industries. Do they know our industry? Like, we've got very specific requirements and needs. These look like generalists. I'd rather go with somebody that specializes in our vertical. They're using the slide that you are so proud of against you. We've got to think about that in the logic that we share. One last example there. There's one company that I was working with on this. They were in the antivirus space, like the selling antivirus technology. They have a slide, like slide number 2 was, they are the 2019 Antivirus Technology of the Year award winner. They're so proud of it, right? They're like, but look at us. And so, like, as I'm coaching them, I kind of have to be a jerk to a certain extent. But I looked at it and I was like, wow, that's really impressive. Hey, who won it in 2020? Because like it sounds like you're no longer the best. Like you were the best in 2019, but now somebody else is the best. And they're just like, like, hey, you've got to think that way when you're sharing logic. We've got to tell a story that leads to us, and get the logic out of the beginning of those things, because you're literally polarizing people. And I said it to them, but most of those people aren't saying it. They're thinking it, and they're helping inform their own decisions through the logic. So just stop it.
And you know what that gets me thinking there, Todd? It's just kind of coming full circle here. Is think about when someone raises an objection. They've raised it, it's theirs. So they're going to hang on to it, right? And that's their established opinion. So anything you say to counter that, they're hanging on to their own even stronger.
Exactly.
But the reverse of that is if you're transparent and you're leading with that, they have nothing to hang on to. You've removed it from them. So all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'm going to go with I'm going to be the 5 out of the 10 on the right side.
Yeah.
So that just kind of that was my little aha from just what you shared there, because we do think about, even in a meeting, when you raise your point and it doesn't, you hang on to, even if you start realizing that's not a great point, you're like, but I said it, like I voiced it, it's great, and it's like, not really.
That's it. Exactly. I mean, that was the story of the apparel manufacturer too. That when I went in and I was in this group of people, they started the conversation by saying, "Todd, how are you better than them?" And I decided to say, "Hey, before we get there, can I just share what this company just released? We don't have it. It's not on our roadmap, and if it's going to be important, let's talk about that now." And that gave everybody an opportunity to share their thoughts on it, and it completely disarmed it too, so that later on that couldn't come back to hurt us. The movie 8 Mile by with Eminem, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like the final rap battle where it's him and another guy, and his rap is all about all the things that that individual could potentially say negatively about him. And so he let it go, everybody went crazy, and then he handed the other guy the mic, and the guy was just like, got nothing, right? And that's exactly what you're doing. So you're disarming the competition by doing that as well.
And you know what though, Todd? I think about, the younger folks coming into sales, and if they were posed that question, why are you better than them? I'm going to say 7 out of 10 of them are going to start listing the features and benefits of of why they are. And it's just, I think there's a level of experience, there's vulnerability, and it's just the shift in mindset that's going to say, let me just step back, not go apple to apple, get the spreadsheet out, because at that, it's just a race to the bottom for price. But just like what you did is, it seems very counterintuitive, but it works. So I think anyone who's looking to try this is going to have to just, put yourself in the customer's position. They're expecting that, well, theirs is 2.4, ours is 2.2. We do this for 3 years, theirs is 4. Like, that's just you don't want to get into that dance. And it's just like, it's so unexpected for you to say, well, this is what they are, that I think the disarming is going to be automatic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, I remember in my last company, my CEO was just so, he loved the NASCAR slide. And our biggest competitor was bigger than us and had more impressive customers too. Like, just think about that. That if we're trying to say that this is really impressive, but we know our competitor is going to come up with a slide that's even more impressive, we actually just hurt ourselves through that. So we've got to be careful with all of that. That's
Yeah,
exactly
that's
it.
that's fantastic. So we've covered so much today, really on the neuroscience and the buying behavior, empathy, and really what it is and how we can share it with our team as leaders, but also with our customers. And then the big transparency. And I love the word flawsome, and just lead with those imperfections to disarm. So I'm sure at this point there's a lot of salespeople thinking, man, this is going to be a shift, but I'm willing to give it a shot. So for those people, could you give them 3 things that they could start doing, today, that could start getting them into that mindset of being more transparent?
Well, yeah, I think number one is just you got to shift your mindset to realize that your role is to help the customer predict. That the customer's role in life, when they're trying to make a decision, is they're trying to get their brains to understand whether the juice is going to be worth the squeeze. And if all they're hearing is how delicious and nutritious the juice is going to be, and there's no squeeze there, every word that's coming out of your mouth is going through a filter. And we need to disarm that filter. So, like, tip number one is to start to curate all of the reasons why a customer may not buy from you, right? And it's looking at reviews, do the web searches, read the things that customers complain about that customers are going to find on their own. Start to curate from the losses that you've had consistent themes, not only in the reasons why people don't buy from you, but is there anything particular about them? Maybe it's verticals, maybe it's company sizes, could be geos, could be the individuals, the demographics of the people that you're selling to. Start to understand that, because A, it'll help you to prioritize your time and prioritize the opportunities that you go after. But B, it'll help to inform that transparent language, that flawsome, we're not perfect and here's why type of language. So I think that that's number one. The second thing that I really believe that we all should do is to understand that that we talked about this idea of clinical empathy. But again, we're in a place where consensus buying is really hard, and it's gotten so much harder with with everybody being remote. So take a look at the buying journey that you take a customer through, and what types of things are we doing to reduce friction from that journey because when you do that, first of all, you're endearing. We talked about that ice cream example of the kids showing up at the ice cream parlor and there's the line down the street and kids screaming. Even though that ice cream is still going to taste as sweet if you deal with it, your perception of that reward is biased by the perceived journey. So we've got to make that journey simple and remove friction from it. And when we do that, we not only endear our customers to less likely choose the status quo, but I also believe there's a huge opportunity in every company, especially a company that's got competitors that are similar, to differentiate in the way that you sell. All right, that's important. You've got an opportunity to differentiate in the way that you sell. And then topic number 3 is for the leaders, right? The tip number 3 is really, I want you all to think about your purpose and your mission. Leaders, you've got to get beyond the forecast in your one-on-ones and start to make those connections with your reps and make sure that they feel secure, but also make sure they understand the impact, the purpose of their work beyond just the numbers, the deals, and the quarters. That starts with you, leaders. And number 2 is we've got to make that shift from the, hey, we hate to lose, and if we lost, it's because of you got outsold, to, hey, let's celebrate the losses. You're already getting punished for losing in your wallet and in your quota attainment. Let's look at these opportunities, look at these losses as opportunities to learn and celebrate the individual for the effort that they put in so that we lose less often. We get better at forecasting. Morale improves so we can head off this potential massive turnover binge that's about to happen due to the fact that there is very low physical or emotional cost to changing jobs today. So that's my rant. Those are the 3 things that I think everybody, like, I'm pounding the desk hoping that people start to do right away.
Yeah, I can feel the conviction coming through there, and those are 3 very valuable and tactical and achievable things regardless of what level of sales you're in. So thank you for sharing those, and I would encourage everybody just to start making the shift. Like, you have to start, right? Kind of move through that initial discomfort, but the results speak for themselves. So, Todd, I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to educate myself, and, of course, our audience on everything related to the transparency sale. And also commend you on. We never really talked about your sales nerdery. You mentioned a few books from the 1900s and before that. So what it shows is that the message is consistent back there. Like the fundamentals are what continue to hold true, and that sense of integrity and truth. Hundreds of years later, is still what's holding true. So that's amazing. So for those who are interested in maybe learning more about you or following you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm kind of hard not to find, almost to an annoying level. But yeah, transparencysale.com or toddcaponi.com, they all go to the same place. That's a good place to start. I share a lot of articles and my nerdery. Again, when I wrote the book, my intention wasn't to build a business around it, it was to get these ideas out there. So there's a lot of stuff there that you can interact and engage with. But hey, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn too. I share a lot there. Just let me know where you heard me, because that certainly endears me to definitely accept. And I would love to be a resource for all of you if appropriate. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone who tuned in today. So if you enjoyed the show, please like it, share it, and subscribe to either the podcast or the YouTube channel. So thanks again. This is Karen Kelly signing off. See you next time.